Good morning, everyone. It's time for another installment of PR Patter. I'm Julie Livingston, Want Leverage Communications, and I am so delighted today to have with me Charles Bernard of Criteria for Success. Charles brings over 20 years of experience in direct sales, sales management, recruiting, and training. And as a sales executive for GE, Charles was the top revenue producer in his division. He founded and operates Criteria for Success, a sales improvement training and sales playbook development company based in Manhattan. Some of his clients include the Weather Channel, WebMD, Time Inc., which is now Meredith, and British Telecom. He's also a sales keynote speaker. Welcome, Charles. Great to see you today.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for the honor of the invitation. Very happy to be here.
That's awesome. So our topic today is, building trust, establishing trusting relationships with key stakeholders. We're living in a post-pandemic world. It's dramatically changed the way we live and certainly the way we work. How have these shifts affected leaders and the relationships they build with their teams, Charles? What are you seeing?
Well, I'll start, Julie, at a macro level. I've been following the Edelman Trust Report, and it comes out every year.
Yeah.
And it's Richard Edelman, who's the CEO. It's kind of his pet project. I know he personally gets
it's amazing. I really read every word very carefully.
Well, I also, Julie, as you know, have a vested interest in Edelman because for a number of years, my daughter, Sophia, was a senior vice president. They're very proud of the work she's done. And in 2022, the trust report came out with, for me, some surprises. And it was almost like it revealed how people were more inclined to distrust than trust.
Right.
And I think he said something like, 60% of respondents defaulted to a sort of distrusting mindset. And then the other surprise for me was that businesses in the 2022 report were the most trusted institutions above government and media. And media in particularly was slammed. And I don't want to get political because
right. I think we all know where that came from.
But I think trust, bottom line, to answer your question about leadership, trust, I think, is critical to business performance because a lack of trust can lead to unreported misconduct, lots of damage to the company's reputation, to the reputation of leaders. And so there's another benchmark that I follow, which is LRN. They're the Legal Research Network. They focus on ethics and regulatory compliance and stuff like that. So it's kind of nerdy stuff. But they also said some interesting thing about business leaders have to really address some of the distrust in government and some of these places, and big companies in particular. During the pandemic, I was very interested in this topic, and Cisco, which is a very big company, the tech company, had said quite a few things on YouTube, and their head of HR was basically saying, and the CEO was basically saying that a lot of the employees are relying on the leaders in their own institutions to help rationalize some of the loneliness, some of the mistrust in the messaging,
wow.
like media, what we were talking about, with the pandemic, there's a lot of missed messages, et cetera. And just, with the riots, if you remember, there were all the riots in the streets, especially around the Floyd issue, and people were just unhappy, a lot of unhappiness. And so they were saying, and I totally believe it, that people were looking at their companies first and their leaders in their companies and their teammates, the people that you spend all this time at work with, to sort of resolve a lot of these conflicts that they want.
That's fascinating. I mean, it used to be your family, right?
Right.
But that marks a really big shift for sure. Yeah. And I think identifies a huge opportunity and a responsibility.
Yes, that you were going right where I was going, which is I think when leaders begin to realize how much employees are expecting from a leadership standpoint, from their leaders, including the CEO and the senior executives, that it really does place a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. Couldn't agree more.
Do you think that leaders overestimate how much their teams trust them?
Without a doubt. Yeah. I think, you know, I know there's a lot to be said, and I don't want to go down a ton of rabbit holes about leadership, servant leadership, lead by example. I tend to have a lot more of a simpler approach, to be honest. And I think these have served me and the clients I've worked with, um, because a lot of these philosophies are difficult to execute. So I kind of boil it down to if you're doing four things, then you can't be overestimated as a leader. And what I mean by that is number one, biggest problem that I think creates mistrust of a leader is when that leader becomes a bottleneck, right?
Ah,
So what I mean by that more specifically is I work for a leader and you're my leader and I sent you two reports and I'm waiting for feedback or I'm waiting for a decision. I need to spend some budget and it needs to happen soon and you're not getting back to me. So you're a bottleneck. You're like, well, I got to, make a decision. Then you don't. So that's one. Or another is that everything has to be rubber stamped by the leader. Like you've now become the center of everything. You're a bottleneck.
right. Where if the leader does not trust you to make more of your own decisions and be somewhat autonomous, if they don't empower you.
Bingo, right?
Yeah.
Along with that, it's like immediately connected to what I just said is be responsive, right? So not everything's a decision, not everything's a budget line item decision, but if someone sends you an email, even if it's an FYI email, respond. I find a lot of leaders are busy. We're all busy. We get hundreds of emails a day. And any email you sit on, that's gone for eternity. I mean, it's like you're getting another 100 emails in your inbox. The one you just
Exactly.
didn't respond to is pushed down. So I know there's a lot of controversy around, do you block off time to not respond to email? I think if you're a leader, you got to respond. You got to be there for everybody quickly.
It creates not only the bottleneck, it really creates a lot of stress, I think, and anxiety in team members, because I think a lot of people start to imagine, well, why aren't they responding to me? Maybe they're not happy with my work. Maybe they don't think my idea is worthwhile. Maybe they're going to put the kibosh on my project.
Maybe it's a passive aggressive move. I mean, it's like a lot of people are left to make these thoughts that not often are very positive because there's already a bit of a mistrust about you as a leader. So even, Julie, if the expectation is there's a lot here for me to process, I will work on this today or I'll get back to you tomorrow. How long does that take to tap out? It's like a 10-second response.
Yeah.
And then put a reminder in your calendar, which I think is the best place to respond to the people you said you would get back to. Number three, which I think is probably the most important, that I think almost goes without saying, but then the moment you realize someone's not doing it, it's a major problem. And that is leaders have to honor their word. So, for example, if I'm the VP of sales and I'm responsible for delivering a new compensation plan every year, Julie, can you imagine I'd be curious, how many clients of mine don't release the comp plan until mid-year, Q1? And the problem with that is that if you've made changes to the comp plan year after year, so let's say 2022,
Right.
Now you have a new change in 2023, but you're not releasing that until Q2, March, April, the assumption by the salesperson is that the old comp plan is still in effect. But that's not true, because the old comp plan, it actually says it expired December 31st. So now the salesperson's in limbo, wondering, well, am I covered by the old? So honoring your word is essentially setting expectations, making promises. And if you're going to not keep a promise, because sometimes we just can't help, life gets in the way, then telling people, I know I committed to this date. I'm not going to make it. I don't need to give you a whole reason why I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it, but I will promise to get it to you by this other date. To me, that's honoring your word, because yes, you broke the promise. However, you were responsible about it. So this whole idea of my word means something as a leader, I think it's critical for people to understand. And then I can hold other people accountable.
Yeah,
to
I couldn't agree with you more. And because I think also when leaders don't respond and all of this stuff happens, it really has a trickle down effect on morale and motivation and productivity. Why should team members be at their best, at their top energy level, when the leader in charge is not responding or not giving them constructive feedback?
Right. And which is beautiful, because again, I see so many situations, and I had to learn the hard way that I would ask for reports. I would say to my salespeople, by Friday, I need an activity report, pipeline report, and your prospects, right? Eventually, the salespeople started to recognize that I wasn't reading those reports, and then they go, "Well, why should I go out of
Right.
my way to write all these reports for you if you're not even giving me feedback? Like, it's going into a black hole." So I think you're dead on. I think it's a two-way street.
So, talk a little bit about transparency. I mean, this is something that is often on my mind when I'm coaching, providing strategic communications counsel to clients, when I'm ghostwriting their LinkedIn content. Talk about transparency and its effect on building trust, especially now during, such an incredible time of change.
I think transparency is critical, and it's one of those things that a lot of people talk about, but they don't either understand it or they don't practice it. Transparency, I don't think, is just blurting out whatever's on the top of your head, because sometimes, and I'm really guilty of this, because I tend to be known for giving too blunt feedback, and then I kind of realize that maybe I didn't take into account the sensitivity of the other person. Some people like that. Some people, frankly, don't want that kind of blunt feedback. So you have to be careful with transparency in the true sense of the word, right? So then when you ask me, tell me about transparency, I think it starts with, what are you committed to as core values, right? So I'm committed to transparency. I want people to know that I don't have a hidden agenda. Sometimes I can't tell everybody everything, and there's a good reason why I can't, because someone told me something in confidence. I can't just share that, right? So
Right.
I've got to withhold in certain situations, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about core values. So I'll tell you what mine are. I'm not saying they're better than anybody's, but I just learned, again, through trial and error, that besides talking to everyone's bigness, not their smallness, that's probably my biggest. Like, I could think of everybody's bad points, but I always try to promote
Yeah,
the good points
of
in my
course.
right. Find the good in everybody. That was my mother's, by the way. She always found the good in everybody. I learned that from her. And I think my default most valuable core value that I learned was clean up my messes. And I tell people, there are going to be times I give you too blunt feedback, like I said before, or there's going to be times I'm insensitive, or there's going to be times I do something. So feedback is critical. That's important for transparency. I think, I have an open door policy. It's okay with you to say, Charles, at that meeting, I just want to let you know that I felt very embarrassed when you called me out for being late on that deliverable. And I want people to know that I have this core value. And the core value is I always clean up my messes. So I may not get it right. I may screw up. I may make a mess, but I'm committed to cleaning it up. And if
That's good. I mean, look, we're all human. Things happen. We make mistakes.
Exactly. So I think, if it means an apology, like, I get that from your perspective. I could see how I gave you that feedback in front of your peers. Number one, I want to apologize. Number two, how can I clean it up? And I actually did this fairly recently, Julie, where I had a situation like this, and I promised the person that at the next group meeting, I would take a moment, and I did. And I basically said, I want everyone to be aware that I made a mistake, and I'm apologizing in front of this person who I called out. And I just want everyone to realize that that's not consistent with who I want to be. And if that ever happens to anybody else, please call me out on it. To me, it gets kind of that, the head trash, I call it,
Yeah.
out of my head.
I think people appreciate that and respond positively to that too. You've talked a lot about gratitude, and how increasingly that's an important part of being a leader and developing trusting relationships. How does gratitude work?
You really are great. You're hitting something that's very near and dear to me. So I have a friend and coach, Joe Applebaum. He's pretty well known in some of my circles. And I told him that I had built this beginning of day routine and end of day routine, which includes looking at my goals, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I love that. I love the discipline, but could I offer you something? And I said, of course. I really listened to you, Joe. And he said, why don't you at the end of every day do three things? One, ask yourself what you're grateful for.
Yeah.
Two, who did you help today? And three, who are you going to send an email to acknowledge the good performance? It doesn't have to be big. It could just be, hey, I noticed in the way you handle that client on that call was awesome. And maybe I copy the whole sales team. So the reason I love that, Julie, especially the gratitude part, is I notice when I don't do that, my day tends to be a blur. But when I sit back and reflect of what I'm grateful for in particular, it gives me a sense of having done something purposeful for my day. It wasn't just a whole bunch of back-to-back meetings.
No, it's a really nice end cap. It's funny. I'm just looking for I write in this monk manual every day, and it gives you prompts for doing exactly what you said.
Right.
How did you give back today? How did you help others today? What are you grateful for in your life?
Yeah. And I think it's just a nice way to almost separate your personal life, your professional work day. Like, okay, put an end cap, like you said, on that. And now I'm going to watch TV, or I'm going to read a book.
Yeah,
or
sure.
I'm not carrying all that noise with me because
no, it really makes you feel good. I find that it does. It just levels off everything. I think it's a really smart practice. It's not woo woo. It's just a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about leadership and how leaders build trust with their teams. How does trust play into problem solving and team engagement?
Yeah.
Because I know so many leaders really struggle with this, how to delegate problem solving. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, this is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and working with myself, my own company, but with my clients. And, one of these people, you probably figured out that I like to get to what's the essence of stuff. Like if I can get to the root of something,
right,
I can do something about it. So to answer your question, I tend to go right to the very essence of what is leading in an organization, what is project management, what is teamwork, all of that. It comes down to me I can't think of anything lower than this level, and that is, it's all about conversations. So if I'm speaking and listening and interacting with my leader, or I'm a leader interacting with my people, or I'm interacting with my peers, and we're all aligned on getting something accomplished. Could be making a sale, it could be developing a product, anything that we're aligned on. I tend to look at what are the types of conversations that are occurring. And what I've noticed is that some organizations are much more rigorous around the types of conversations because it's all about interaction and communication. So, for example, I noticed probably the one conversation that occurs the most that has the least amount of impact on accomplishing goals as a team is what I call passive opinions. Like, here's what I think, here's this other thing, this guy's not good, this is a problem, blah, blah, blah. And no one's bringing a solution. They're just commenting on the situation like they're amused by it. Like, this is what I think, this is what you think, I think this, I think that. And people tend to forget that if you're on a deadline or you're out to accomplish something, it's like, well, okay, I get that that's what you think, but what needs to happen? So then we get into these other conversations, which I say are going to drive action. And there's a great book, and this guy goes back to the 50s. So this isn't new thinking. It's called Words That Perform. And it's written by a guy called J.L. Austin. He was a British philosopher. In the philosophy of language, there are words that perform. So when we talk about performance, words that make things happen are promises. Like when I say I promise, I am promising by saying I promise. It's a speech act.
Right.
It's a commitment. It's like it's not like if I say here's a hand, my word hand doesn't actually mean hand, isn't actually a hand, but a promise. Requests, declarations are very powerful. So I see, and people are kind of skittish about declaring because they don't want to commit necessarily. So declarations is like an example in everyday life. I declare the testimony I will give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And someone's putting their hand on a Bible. They're literally saying the words I say are critical. I declare you're married. That's a declaration.
Sure.
No one gets married until someone declares they're married. You can go on and on and on, but a leader, if we bring it back to organization, declares mission, vision, values. It wasn't something that someone else declared. The leader declared that. So I think these sort of ideas of declaring and being purposeful and making decisions generates trust. Like if you promise something to me, I trust you're going to deliver on it. If you request something of me, I trust by making the request that you're either going to accept, decline, or counteroffer. I trust that. You're not going to like look at me going, you just made a request. What does that mean?
Right.
It's like, no, you're asking for something. So rather than passive opinions, I like assertions, meaning I assert we're late because this thing's not happening, this other thing's not happening. Does anyone agree with me? Yes. What are we going to do about it? It's different than I think, oh, it's late. And someone's waiting, like, oh, no, it's just late. I don't know what to do about it. Would you have any thoughts? Like maybe. So I just think this whole idea around being more rigorous about the impact of our word, the impact of our language, the impact of our everyday interactions, I think people tend to forget how significant and important your word is and how what you say matters. And I think if a leader can bring that out in a team, that's important. And you don't have to have a title, by the way, to be a leader. Have you ever seen that?
I think you're so right, because everybody has an impact on somebody else in an organization.
Yeah.
So it's really how, and I think mindfulness also plays a part in all of this. in developing trusting relationships. Really being mindful, which is what you're describing,
Yeah.
about choosing your words, choosing your behavior, and sticking with it, and being consistent in your communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Charles, where could people get in touch with you?
So I'll give you my email. It's cbernard@criteriaforsuccess.com. It's all spelled out. It's a big mouthful. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think it's Charles Bernard 1, but don't quote me on that. It might be Bernard 1. I'm not sure. But if you just go Charles Bernard Criteria for Success.
Great. I just put it in the chat here too.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a great conversation, and hope everyone will come back next time for another installment of PR Patter.
Thank you, Julie.